Hello and welcome to the Within the Myths podcast, where we search for cryptids, ghosts, and other mysteries. I am your host, Gary, and today I am joined by a very special guest. Famous John Urban is a cryptozoologist, author, and illustrator. He was formerly a musical journalist for several national magazines, but now he has turned his creativity into whimsical, fully illustrated works, earning him the nickname as the Dr. Seuss of cryptozoology. So let's get to know him and his works better. Please join me as I welcome to the show famous John Urban. Welcome, John.
Hi, Gary. Thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, that's great. I mean, I really wanted to open with a Bigfoot joke, but they're really hard to find.
I don't even know if I know one, except like the typical thing about them being hide and seek champions. And I guess what's the other one about nobody ever asked Bigfoot, yet he never complains. Like Yeti.
Well, I do know that one Bigfoot couple was having a problem with their teenage Bigfoot. I mean, he was quite a Sasquatch.
It's funny you mention it. I mean, I don't know. It's just a lot of non-believers, when you put something serious on, they'll have like the videos of the dancing Sasquatch and the Sasquatch playing the saxophone and stuff like that. And after seeing that a million times, it's like, oh, okay, here we go again.
Well, it's funny. You definitely take a different spin on it. So how did you get started?
Well, let's see here. Grab my reference and stuff. Oh, here we go. Well, basically, like I said, as far as I'm one of these people that they say you can't serve two masters, but I've always been a writer and an illustrator. And I've really been writing as far back as junior high and high school in the school papers. I would have cartoons and I would review records because I was into rock music and stuff. I actually got sent to the principal office 3 times for cartoons I did in high school. But I was also a writer. So then years later, I got a degree in commercial art. And I started writing for different heavy metal magazines covering like the local heavy metal scene and things of that nature. And then I was still pursuing my work. I was a professional caricature artist for a lot of big theme parks in Tampa, like Busch Gardens and the Tampa Zoo and the Florida Aquarium. So I had that whimsical style of artwork. When you do caricature, it's really mostly line work and everything, which kind of leans towards like coloring books of that nature. But my first book was way back in 2019. I don't know if you can see it. It's Ward the Wolf Boy. This is the cover there. And it was kind of a Harry Potter-like book about a teenage boy that was finding out he was a werewolf. And I kind of originally did it because I was hoping to start doing Bigfoot. I'm not Bigfoot, but coloring books for, book covers, I'm trying to say. Book covers for other artists or writers. And I thought, well, I'll just do a demo book. And then I started really getting into characters. So I released that. But my main passion has always been Bigfoot. So a few years ago, in like Christmas time of 2021, I published my first, let's see if I got, excuse me, you can see it here, but I had my first, so I always never know when to lean these things. There you go. My first colored book of famous Bigfoot Yeti encounters. The full name is Famous Bigfoot and Yeti Encounters Coloring Book. So briefly, how that started was I just started posting these illustrations I did of Bigfoot on some Facebook pages, and I started getting like 100 likes and everything. And people started saying, "Oh, you should make a Bigfoot coloring book." I'm like, well, "That's a great idea." I'm a caricature artist and caricature artist, so I thought that'd be great. I'll be the first person ever to do a Bigfoot coloring book. And I look at Amazon, there's like 50 of them. So I almost didn't do it, but I saw that most of them, when I looked at them, they all look like the Patterson creature, and they're all happy, frumpy Bigfoot playing in the wilderness with a wildlife and everything, frolicking in the woods. I'm like, nah, Bigfoot are these big, intimidating characters. So I went the other extreme and made mine more muscular and aggressive and stuff. And it turned out really being an illustrated history of Bigfoot. So my Bigfoot book has a 2-page glossary. It tells what all the Bigfoot were, so kids, if they're interested, could go back and research it. So I kind of like to think that I'm kind of making kids interested in Bigfoot by doing this coloring book. They kind of read about it, because in the glossary, I kind of give the dates and a brief story about it. And that way, if they're interested, they can Google it. So that's kind of how that started.
So what you do is that you take a famous or well-known Bigfoot encounter that someone has had, and you basically do an illustration of that for children and people who adults like myself who enjoy coloring, so that they can color, and it kind of exposes them to those stories and to those legends. Is that correct?
Yeah, I just kind of like to spark their interest. I mean, the thing about the reference to like the cryptozoology, Dr. Seuss, is that when I was young, I was into the Dr. Seuss books and also the where the wild things are, things of that nature. That's what kind of got me interested. And the funny thing I always say, people always, when I'll say, oh, I've been into Bigfoot my entire life, people always say that. But with me, it's kind of true because I was born in the winter of '63, and the following year, well, let me just say, a lot of people say they got into Bigfoot by like the Patterson film or the Legend of Boggy Creek or Harry and the Hendersons. But I think if you grew up in America after '65 and had a TV in your house, your parents weren't opposed to Bigfoot, your introduction to Bigfoot was this guy.
Right.
From Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, because he came out the following year after I was born. We watched it every year. I'm 61 now. I probably watched it every Christmas. I got the VHS and the DVD and stuff. So that was what really introduced me to Bigfoot, made me interested in Bumble. But then when the Patterson film came out a couple years later, because it came out, 68?
69.
69, yeah. I was about 5. And Patterson made a documentary of making the film. And it went us out at the theaters. And I remember it's kind of short. It's about 45 minutes. They ran it with some other nature film about big cats. But I was always into apes and monkeys. So my parents are gone. I can't ask them why. But they took me to the movie theater to see it. And I see the patty creature on the big screen, 30 feet tall. And I'm like, oh, my gosh, Bumble's real. And then a few years later, when The Legend of Boggy Creek came out, again, my parents took me to the movie theater to see it. That's probably about 9 then. So I had a very early introduction to Bigfoot. And I've been fascinated for my whole life. So I'm trying to find my books kind of inspire the same thing that got me started into Bigfoot. Because there's enough.
Yeah, actually, Bumble had me confused for quite a long time because I always assumed that because Bumble was white, the abominable snowman must be white, so the Yeti was always a white Bigfoot. But then as I got older and did more reading and discovered that no, it was Rankin who turned him white. He had always been a brown furred Bigfoot type creature.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the. Because I don't know, it's just he's a snowman and things like that. But yeah, most reports have him being either dark brown or black hair. So it's, so it's just kind of one of those artistic licenses he did then. Although there are sightings of albino Bigfoot, they do happen.
Oh yeah,
but
even here in the United States. And what's neat is that that made me think of something. I mean, basically, since yours is a coloring book, I guess you could color these Bigfoots any color that you wanted to.
Well, that's the thing, because like I said, tell people, well, it's kind of funny. One of my friends, when they told me that when I told them I was going to make a Bigfoot coloring book, they said, oh, you should give a brown crayon away with it instead of all Bigfoot or brown. And I'm like, well,
right.
I mean, they're usually black or dark haired, or a lot of times they're reddish brown, auburn, cinnamon, whatever. But they have the occasional albino, they even have blonde. I mean, pretty much the same kind of colors that we have. And so, yeah, you just never know. They're all over the place, basically.
So then this not only educates, but sparks imagination.
Yeah. I mean, basically, it's your book. You can color it any way you want. We just don't know. I think and the other thing about my book, the coloring book, is that I try to explore the different faces of Bigfoot, because I think what is most intriguing about Bigfoot, well, first off, I also grew up being into all the universal monsters like werewolf and Frankenstein and Dracula. But I think what's most captivating about Bigfoot is the fact you got this, I don't like to call it a monster, that implies it's a myth, but this monster type creature that could possibly exist. It could I mean, when the Jaws movie came out, I saw that when I was a kid too. You're afraid to go in the water. Well, with Bigfoot, you're afraid to go in your backyard. It could be anywhere. Particularly, I live in Florida. They're down here, and not all states, but a lot of. I grew up in Ohio. They have the Ohio grassmen over there. So yeah, they're the fact that they do exist. But then when I got off track a little bit, but they don't all look the same, because basically, I mean, it'd be a big debate whether you believe the Patterson creature is real. It's 50-50 on that, although I don't feel it's ever been officially debunked. But if you think everything looks like Patterson, that'd be easy, because she's kind of more ape-like. But some people say there's usually 3 categories. There's ape-like, like the Patterson creature, and there's kind of like a hybrid, like a Neanderthal, half ape, half man. And then some people say they look human, very human. So like there's some hunters that are going to shoot Bigfoot. They look through the scope of the gun, they see the face, and they just couldn't do it because it just looked too human. So you got this whole spectrum. So apparently it seemed like they change region to region. So, if you catch one Bigfoot, you're not going to know what they all look like because all the reports are different.
That's great. So what made you pick out these specific ones that you had in the famous Bigfoot and Yeti Encounters book?
Well, I mean, some of them are just general pictures like Bigfoot. Well, I kind of took different situations. Like a lot of times people say they steal livestock. So I got one taking a pig from a farm or going across the road and things of that nature. But I just picked some of the more interesting ones, like the Ape Canyon attack. Of course, I got the Patterson film in there. The Mount St. Helens, where the volcano erupted, and supposedly the military were gathering dead Bigfoot and even one or two live specimens. I just tried the Momo, the Missouri Monster, the Iceman in Minnesota, where the showman displayed a dead Bigfoot through all these state fairs and shopping malls in the 60s. Yep, there you go. Perfect. That's the Iceman. So,
Yeah.
But I just tried to pick, like, say, the Russian Bigfoot. That's supposedly, I think it's the late 1800s. But a small Russian village captured this wild woman that was 6.5 feet tall, covered with hair, had an ugly expression, was faster than a horse and stronger than a man, that lived its whole life there in the town, just walked around. So I just tried to pick the most interesting stories and just tried to show the different, like the Tennessee wild man is in the 1800s. That one looked a little bit more human. So I drew that one. So yeah, just all the ones that just give me a wide spectrum of the type of Bigfoot and Yeti attacks, or not attacks.
One key one that I always liked, and I always wanted to get how you came up with this idea, is this one. Basically, the Bigfoot versus Dogman.
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm interested in werewolves, before they consider the Dogman one. And the Dogman's fairly, not a new cryptid, but just getting more popular lately. And I guess the main difference between werewolves and Dogman are werewolves supposedly transform, where Dogmen are believed to just be regular creatures like Bigfoot that always appear that way. But, it just get more common for people to see these werewolf type creatures. And so I thought, well, they may be territorial. So I thought it'd be fun to show them fighting, just have an excuse to throw Dogman in there. Like I also work Chupacabra in there as well. So let's try to make it interesting.
Well, I was wondering if this tied back to your love of the Universal monsters, the original ones, because, even after all of those came out, then they came out with Frankenstein versus Dracula, or Dracula versus the werewolf, the Wolfman. So it kind of made me think that you were going back to those old traditions of, yeah, we know all the classic monster stories, but, why don't we mix it up a bit and throw them in, those old versus movies?
I mean, I've been intentional in the beginning, but that's a good point. It's like I just kind of used an excuse to draw something because, let's see if I got it here. Well, like I said, what inspired me to draw this coloring book is I worked for a call center that did professional moving, and it's called College Hunk Selling Junk. They got it. It's a national company. Its base is in Florida, but they had it up north. And a lot of people up north didn't like to move during the winter because it's cold and rainy and snowy, and they got the holidays and all that. So during the winter time or the cold months, it was really slow. So we had a lot of time between calls. So for Christmas, my brother got me one of those little black hardback books with the blank pages. And I brought it to work just to doodle between calls. And I came up with the idea. I said, there's 100 pages. I'm going to draw nothing but Bigfoot. So that's what I did. There's a book here. I do hundreds of Bigfoot pictures.
Wow.
So, of course, I'm sitting there, what can I do different? What can I do different? And so that's kind of the same thing. In my book, there's about 40 different Bigfoot in there. So I just try to make them as different as possible rather than just drawing the same thing over and over again.
So estimate-wise, how long did it take you to do 100 pictures of Bigfoot?
Well, again, long story short, it probably took me not quite a year, but the thing was, when I first started doing it, I was experimenting with the boldness of the lines and this, that, the other. So as I started doing it, it started coming together. So I started redrawing a bunch of them. And at one time, I got about almost half the book done. And I live in Florida, so I was going to go to a copy place, FedEx, which used to be Kinko's, to get them copied. I went to the doctor's office and I left them in the Florida heat. And I was horrified when I went to print shop, all the ink just bled and I had to start all over. So that took me about a year to get it done the way I just really picked. Most of the drawings were redone 3 or 4 times at least. So I just didn't draw a picture on a long weekend and throw it out there. I put a lot of work into it.
So were you academically trained in art? I mean, did you go to art school or anything like that? Or I know you drew at the theme parks, or where did you get your training mostly on your drawing techniques?
Well, I mean, when I was in high school, I was in a vocational arts class, but I actually have a degree in associate art. So I do have an associate's degree. You talk about jokes. My big joke, I got an associate degree of science. So I'm both an artist and a scientist now.
Oh, there you go. Well, that ties in crypto science.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. Cryptozoology is not an exact science. There's some people like Dr. Meldrum and stuff that actually are. But most of them anyone can really claim to be a cryptozoologist. Most of the people that you see on TV probably don't have degrees.
No, but they're doing the research, the work as best they can. All right.
Yeah, I credit them. They spend all that time, studying people, and they deserve it.
So now we've talked about your other 2 books. Let's talk about your brand new one, where you're not just showing famous incidences of Bigfoot, but you actually did a creative twist on a classic story. So go ahead and tell us about this brand new book.
All right. Well, let's see if I can show it here. Well, again, let's see. I don't know where to turn here. But anyway, this is the cover, and but basically, they're kind of
it's Goldilocks and the 3 Bigfoot.
Actually, technically, it's Goldilocks versus the 3 Bigfoot, and, which I'll go over in a second there. So it's kind of like I was trying to make the title a little bit more humorous. I like the word versus because you say Goldilocks and the 3 bears. When you say and, I think of like Benny and the Jets or Josie and the Pussycats or Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders of Mars. Like they're together, and they're not together at all.
Okay.
And then basically when Goldilocks goes in their house, she breaks a few laws. I mean, she crashes in the house when they're not there. That's breaking and entering. She eats their food. That's, theft. Then she breaks the chair. That's criminal mischief. Then she sleeps in their bed. That's like, loitering or whatever. So, she broke a few rules, and basically Bigfoot is just being territorial, chased her out. Bigfoot is not the bad guy here. If you came home and saw some girl sitting in your bed and ate your food and broke your furniture, you wouldn't be that happy either.
I agree.
But anyway, well, okay, let's see if I have that one here. So when I was a child, they had these books called the Little Golden Books. And my parents got these books, and one of them was The 3 Bears. Now, initially, it was written, got a note here, was written in 1831. It got published a few years later in 37 by Eleanor Muir. But, so it's basically going back to 1800s. Now, it was never presumed to be a true book, but let's say it was. So let's say the girl goes in the woods, sees this house, goes in there, and sees these big, hairy, walking creatures. In the 1800s, I mean, there were Bigfoot reports, like the Texas Wild Man and the Blue Man and stuff like that. But it'd be easy. Everyone always says that when they see Bigfoot, that it's probably bears. So it'd be the same thing. If you don't know what a Bigfoot is, see this big, hairy creature, your first instinct is going to be a bear because that's what you know. So my thought was, what if these were really Bigfoot? Because it makes more sense. They make furniture, they walk on their bare feet, all these things. It seems like the creatures of the 3 bears seem more like Bigfoot than bears.
So a lot more human.
Well, yeah, exactly. So I thought, why not turn it around and make the whole story? And also the whole thing, I kind of incorporated it because basically in the story, when she goes in the woods, she sees a house, just like a regular human house. So in mine, I kind of incorporate more of like a cave. And then when you see the furniture, my story, how Bigfoot makes all the different wood structures and things. So I had all the furniture be more makeshift, rugged looking things like that, the beds and all that. So I just kind of made it seem like more possible that it's actually a Bigfoot structure than, because in the stories of bears, they're dressed in clothes, they live in a house, they have nice furniture. At least mine is a little bit more believable.
Okay. I mean, that is one of the common things that people report when they're out, out in the woods and looking for Bigfoot, or at least evidence of him, is finding structures that are built. You mentioned Ohio, so the Ohio grassman, the reason he got his name is because they were making, grass mounds, kind of like igloos made out of sticks and grass as shelter. So yeah, I guess I could see where a Bigfoot would make these crude structures and homes.
Yeah, I mean, people always say they see the nests and everything, but if they're capable of making these formations, it's not too out of the park to think that they might make furniture. But I just try to make mine a little bit more interesting. And also, the funny thing is, like I said, when I was like a small child when I read these books, and I'm in my early 60s now. So I ordered like 3 of these different types of Bigfoots, the 3 Bigfoot stories, and they're all pretty much the same. I forgot, first off, they're very short, but they're so vague. I mean, they don't say how old Goldilocks is. Just by the artwork, you're assuming 8 or 9. I don't know. I'm not a good judge of ages. But 2 out of the 3 didn't even see why she went in the woods. And the 3rd one said she was gathering flowers for her mother. It was kind of lame. So I decided to make mine. Well, I have a lot more backstory, got a lot more characters. I mean, I pretty much redid the whole story. I still got the thing about eating the porridge, except mine have to be in deer meat, and then breaking the chair and sleep in the bed. That's pretty much it. Generally, I wanted to make my Goldilocks a little bit older, kind of like a Disney princess character. They're usually about 16, 17. So I made mine older, rebellious, pretty girl, and getting in all these shenanigans and stuff. And so that's how I made mine. And because really, as demure as the Little Mermaid is, she still rebelled against her father, and like Frozen, she's turning her whole city into ice and all these things. So some of these girls don't really do a lot of good things. So I had mine be more rebellious and kind of spoiled, and something to work on to make her have a moral, to make her a better person.
A typical teenager.
Yeah. So I thought that made it a little bit more interesting. And the main thing is, I've always been fascinated by the Native American legends of Bigfoot. And because generally back then, every tribe of Native Americans had their own name for Bigfoot. Of course, Sasquatch was originally a Bigfoot name. They're in the totem poles. And one thing I want to say real quick about totem poles, it's so funny when people I say, oh, you're the low man on the totem pole. Well, these Native American totem poles usually have Bigfoot on the bottom. And with Native Americans, the most important is the one on the bottom. They're the base of the totem pole. So if anyone says you're the low man on the totem pole, say, thank you. But anyway, so I was interested in that. And like the legends about, there's one time where certain Indians, they had a war with Bigfoot because the Bigfoot were abducting their women and children. So they had this war, and they basically settled an agreement where they let the Bigfoot have their own property in the deep woods. And, but usually they got along with them. Usually the names of them would usually interpret being tall man or hairy man or man of the forest, that type of thing. They usually called him some sort of a man. So in my book, I kind of made him look a little bit more human. Like in my first book, the cover showed him having like the dark skin, where in my new book, they're flesh colored. And I just tried to make him look a little bit more human. And so I thought, so in order to do this, well, the other thing about Disney is, for lack of a better term, they like to knock off the parents for these Disney characters. I mean, if you look at the animals like Bambi, Dumbo, all these characters, Lion King, father died. So they like to knock off. And then with the humans, like, Snow White, all these other characters. I mean, the Little Mermaid, her mother died. Then there's the evil stepmother and all that stuff. So, I mean, just the other day, I watched Pete's Dragon and the live action version of that. And with 2.5 minutes, the little boy's driving with his family in the car. A deer runs in front of the car gets towed. Next thing you know, you see the deer in the woods and you hear all the metal crunching, of the car. And I've been to 5 accidents. My least favorite sound in the world is metal crunching and tearing. And they have this look, and parents are dead. And see the kid walk away from the cars upside down. There's glass everywhere. And Disney, 3 minutes, knock off the parents right in front of the kids. So I thought, okay, well, what I'm going to do is I wanted to have the Native American legends in my book. Well, she's Goldilocks. She's a fair girl with the blonde hair. So I had her mother being a blonde, but I had her father being Native American. And so I I knocked them off. She was born on the reservation. They called her Goldilocks, and of course, she's the only blonde girl on the reservation. Her parents died, so she's raised by her traditional Native American grandparents, and they're in a farm by the woods. And the grandparents tell them all these legends about the forest people, because I call it Goldilocks versus the Three Bears, because I thought of put forest people. People didn't know what that was, but in my story, I really lean on forest people more so than Bigfoot, and so that gives me an excuse to give all these legends about the Native Americans, how they view Bigfoot. And they warned her not to go in the woods because of forest people. And the last thing I want to mention is I gave her a reason why she went in the woods. Like, why does girl go in the woods in the first place? And the thing is so I kind of, again, I worked the Disney aspect in it. As I already mentioned, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. She lived miles away from any other family. She had no friends. And that's why her grandparents kind of let her get away with not helping out with chores, and she was real spoiled. But they felt bad because she was lonely. Her only friend was there's a baby deer that would come out of the woods every day, and she'd feed it. She loved this deer. Then all of a sudden, one day, the deer stopped showing up. Didn't show up for like a week. And her grandparents just said, oh, don't worry about it. It's probably grown up and went with his own kind, and you're too old to play with deer anyway. But her parents warned her about the forest people, but she didn't really believe in the forest people. But they also had bears and mountain lions and wolves, kind of like the lions and tigers and bear thing. So she went in the woods. She disobeyed her grandparents, and she was also had a realistic fear of these natural predators. But she went in the woods looking for this deer. So that gave her a reason to go in the woods. So that kind of tells like the whole plot, so to speak.
So it sounds like you're tying the traditional story that we all grew up with, you're tying it into a lot of the Native American legends as well as giving it your own twist to fill in the blanks. Is that correct?
Yeah, I just try to educate people more on the whole thing with Bigfoot. Because I was reading the other day, it's like with Bigfoot, really, I use the term Bigfoot because it's I'm used to it. And, it's just what people know. If, like I said, if I would have put Goldilocks versus the forest people, people wouldn't know what I was talking about. But really, Bigfoot, I'm being a creative person, an artist, a writer, I'm also a musician. Back when the first Bigfoot pictures were found and put in the newspaper, it's, Bigfoot, let's call it Bigfoot. Kind of like, really? That's what you got? It's just kind of very vague and uncreative. So the whole Bigfoot word is kind of, to me. So, but that's what we know. So let's stick with it.
So, okay, then you've been working as an educator, and that has now evolved into you being a public speaker at different Bigfoot conventions. Do you have anything upcoming?
Yeah, my biggest one is actually in 3 weeks in Hartselle, Alabama. And they are really big on their train depot. It dates back to the Civil Wars. Apparently one time they kept Civil War, prisoners there and everything. So every year in this Hartselle, Alabama town, they have what's called Depot Days. It attracts thousands of people. And so I've been invited to do a guest speaking role there. They have a little Bigfoot conference there. And I should back up a little bit. Let's see what else I got to show you. I also, another thing, let me see if I can see this here. What was lighter reflection?
Oh, yeah. You're basically the different versions of Sasquatch playing poker.
Yeah. There's a store in Forks, Alabama. No, forgive me, Forks, Washington. That's owned by Ken Hamilton and his wife, Lori Hamilton. And it's one of the biggest brick and mortar stores. It's a physical store. It's not a museum, it's a store. But they started selling my Bigfoot books. And I just happened to, this whole Bigfoot playing poker, honestly, it was kind of like a joke. It was based on the old dogs playing poker. Because I always thought that was me. And so I made this Bigfoot playing poker thing. I just happened to show it to him. He loved it. And I got my own. First, he started having, I'm actually wearing it right now. You can see it. But he started selling T-shirts, and he had like mugs and shot glasses. I got it backwards. But anyway, he started selling these products, and it got to be a big hit. So, now, gosh, he has everything. He has shower curtains, blankets, Christmas ornaments, cornhole games, and of course the puzzle. So it's actually, I actually make more money doing that than my books sometimes. So it's been a real big supporter for me. And so for the past 2 years, when I go to these Bigfoot conventions, every year they have the Great Florida Bigfoot Conference in Ocala, they have their own booth. So I just go there and I sign my books, my artwork there. So, but Ken Hamilton invited me to be in this conference. And it's kind of exciting because all the other speakers there are Connor Flynn and Stacy Brown Jr. And those are people I've known that I've done conferences with, I got to be friends with. And a couple of years ago, Stacy Brown Jr. had his own paranormal conference in Tallahassee, and both me and Connor Flynn were there. So we're all three going to be there together, and we're staying in an Airbnb and all that fun stuff. So, but it's funny, before we were talking about the white Bigfoot, that Alabama has a fair amount of Bigfoot sightings. And also the whole Appalachian Mountains, it starts in Maine, it works all the way down to both North Alabama and Georgia. So, but the weird thing is that there's 3 counties in North Alabama that got their own Bigfoot. Have you ever heard of the white thing or wild?
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. The white thing.
The whole drawing of them. Oops.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, it's like, it's got a history. Again, it goes back to 1800s, but there's a lot of different interpretations of it. But the main thing is it has a white shaggy hair. And now initially it had some really wild descriptions. Sometimes it was kind of like a big canine, or else like a werewolf, or sometimes it was like a werewolf with a woman's face. My favorite, sometimes they said it looked like a kangaroo with like a cat or canine head. But more recently it kind of became the bipedal Bigfoot. But the interesting things about it, outside of always having white hair, it has this big hellish screech like a woman. And which is kind of common with Bigfoot. A lot of times to imitate babies or women, which could be ways for them to lure people in the woods. I don't know. But the weirdest thing about them is that a lot of times they're seen or heard preceding death, like a funeral. So some people thought they're almost like an omen of death. And because they're white, some people think there might be some sort of spirits or demon or something like that. But this Hartselle, Alabama I'm going to is in Morgan County. Morgan County is one of the counties that this creature is seen in. So it's, it's right there where I'm going to be at. So I'm going to try to bring that up so people have some local. And then the Appalachian Mountains, I think it might be like an hour or so from that area. But I kind of think with the fact that the Appalachian Mountains kind of extends from Maine all the way down to Alabama, is I kind of think it's possible that Bigfoot might migrate and go to place, with Appalachian Mountains gives us a way to do so. Oh,
yeah. I mean, the Appalachian Trail is a famous hike that people undertake. So I can imagine that something like a Sasquatch would take advantage of the same kind of terrain as well.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. There's obvious reasons why it might migrate. I mean, it kind of goes where the food is. I mean, deer migrate, so they might go, in the winter months chasing the prey. And then now the other thing is breeding. A lot of times people find 3 or 4 foot footprints, and a lot of people think that might be from inbreeding. So it might be hard if Bigfoot are rare for like a young male to find a mate that's not too closely related. If they're intelligent enough to be aware of that, they might migrate just to find another mate.
Okay, that's definitely good.
Theory.
So this conference that you'll be speaking at's in 3 weeks?
Yeah, it's on the Saturday the 21st. So,
all right, I'll make sure I put a link to that in our show notes.
That'd be great.
And I'm going to put a link. Your books are available on Amazon and any other.
Sasquatch the Legend.
Okay.
But yeah, Amazon is probably the easiest way to go through it.
Well, that's great. I mean, this is amazing. You've had a pretty amazing history, starting out as just a caricature artist and then incorporating a passion for Sasquatch and his history. And now you're expanding into the mythos of Native American legends and our own bedtime stories.
Well, the amazing thing about the cryptozoology is when I got into it, I started with Facebook really saved me because I started I watch all the things on TV where they have the famous cryptozoologists, and a lot of them are like Lauren Coleman, who has the International Cryptozoology in Maine, but also he's known as the godfather of cryptozoology. He's written like 40 books. And then there's Lyle Blackburn, who's written a lot of big researchers on TV all the time. And then also Ken Gerhardt. And it was funny because they both have the cowboy hats. So, but I just didn't realize how easy it was to communicate with people, because I would just start sending a person a message on Facebook, and they actually wrote me back, and we're having conversations. And hey, I'm doing this book. What do you think? Like, for example, Momo, the Missouri Monster, he had three footprints, 3-toe footprints as well. And Lyle Blackburn wrote a book. If they got 3 toes, you think they got 3 fingers? He goes, well, probably. It's use your imagination. But yeah, these 3 people, Lauren Coleman and Ken Gerhardt and Lyle Blackburn, they kind of mentored me, and they actually, it's just kind of funny that these. I remember one time I was watching TV. They'll kill me if I say this, but I was watching TV on a Saturday night. My brother was visiting. We're at the house, and we were watching a documentary, and both Lyle Blackburn and Lauren Coleman were on it. So I take pictures of the TV, and I'm sending a message. Hey, I'm watching you on this show. Next thing you know, they're both talking to me back and forth, on my Facebook. And my brother's staring at me. He goes, you got 2 of the most famous cryptozoologists, had nothing better to do than talk to John Irvin on a Saturday night. I'm like, oh, apparently. But yeah, it's just great. I mean,
it's a great circle.
Well, the joke of it is, like my pen name, Famous John Irvin. That, what I like to tell people, not quite that arrogant. It started out as an inside joke, because back in the 80s, I was in a band called Brad, heavy metal band. They had an album out that didn't do well, but I was popular locally. And then when I got out of that and went back to art college, I started writing for these magazines. And at one time, I was writing for a local magazine and also doing reviews for the Tampa Tribune newspaper. And I was booking a very popular club called the Rocket Club. And so I was very well known in the local rock scene. And every time I go out there with my friends or my brother, people say, hey, there's John Urban. They say, how did I know you? I'm like, well, I'm famous. And it became an inside joke, then became a nickname that I adopted as my screen name and stuff. So I still use it. I've been using it since the 90s. So when people ask about Famous John Urban, I'll say, well, I'm not famous yet, but famous people know who I am. So it's kind of like in a certain degree,
That's a good plan. I like that.
That's the whole thing started out as an inside joke.
Well, we're reaching the end of our time. Is there anything else that we wanted to touch on before we go?
Well, like I said, again, I've been fortunate that I have my Bigfoot books in quite a few Bigfoot museums and venues. Like I mentioned, Lauren Coleman's International Cryptozoology Museum in Maine, and I got the Oklahoma Museum. And then I got, Cliff Brockman. I remember I met him at a Bigfoot conference before I had my book completed, and I showed some preliminary drawings, and he was like, yeah, let me go. So it's his North American Center for Bigfoot in Boring, Oregon. So he's got my book. But I would like to point out, I'm very good friends with a man named David Shealy, who owns the Skunk Ape headquarters in the Everglades. And he's one of my biggest sellers. So, and I've been, he has a campground there. He put me up at his campground. I went there selling books and everything. So yeah, I just, in the last 2-3 years, I've done pretty well as far as people, promoting my book and everything. So I'm off to a good start.
Well, I'm glad, and I hope you continue with it.
Thank you. I definitely have. It's my main thing.
Well, I appreciate you giving us your time, and I look forward to running into you again, hopefully very soon. For our audience, you can always find the famous John Urban on Amazon, Facebook, and at the different conventions. But until then, I hope you enjoyed today's interview. You'll come back next week for another story. And until then, why don't you make a trip and color a picture of Bigfoot here and there, and otherwise remain constantly curious. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.